Hi folks. Well, seeing as we've just had the wettest August on record, we thought that now would be a pertinent time to talk about weatherproofing your Glawning. Now, as you can see, weatherproof fabrics come in many different types. Something like this will just about keep the rain off altogether. However, it's not necessarily the best thing to make a tent out of. So you might think, well, why not just use whatever's really waterproof and make the tent out of that? Because my head's staying reasonably dry under here. Well, the reason is that although it may be waterproof, it's not breathable. You need it to be breathable. Why, you might ask? Well, if I was to run all the way around this field in this poncho, by the time I got back, I'm going to be feeling pretty uncomfortable. In fact, just standing here in it now, it's pretty hot and pretty clammy. However, with this nice cotton t-shirt, I feel comfortable. So as I was saying, the reason we make tents out of cotton, or why cotton is such a lovely material to make tents out of, is because it's breathable. So it's really comfortable to be inside of. With nylon, polyester type tents, you don't get that breathability. So in weather like this, on a nice hot day, it'll just be really, really hot inside there, like a sauna. In a canvas tent, it will stay relatively cool. And in the winter, if you've got the fire going, it will retain the heat, so it'll stay nice and warm inside a canvas tent instead of the heat just disappearing. The other really important thing is condensation. In a canvas tent, because it's breathable, because those water vapours are allowed to escape, you don't get the condensation on the inside like you get on a nylon tent. So those factors are the reasons why a cotton tent is so comfortable to be in as opposed to a nylon tent. The other thing to bear in mind, of course, is that cotton will last a lifetime and you can repair it and all sorts of other things, but we're straying off the subject. So for the sciencey bit, it's actually not very scientific at all, but the way that canvas works is it's a natural fibre and it's kind of woven together like you would expect fabric to be woven together, something like that. But you've got the various fibres woven together in the canvas, and if you stand inside the tent when you first get it, you might even see kind of little bits of sunlight coming through. That's perfectly normal. What needs to happen is for the water to soak into that canvas so that those fibres get really soaking wet, and as they do, they'll expand and it'll close up. All the little tiny holes will all expand and close up like that, and then as it dries out, they actually shrink and contract and pull together really tightly so that it creates a nice watertight seal. And as I say, that needs to happen a few times. There needs to be a few kind of expanding and contracting until all the little tiny holes are closed up. The ones that take the longest to weather are the bigger holes where stitches have been put through the canvas. So where the stitches that have been put through, those are going to take a bit longer to weather. On a cloud gazer tent, you'll actually have a PVC panel here against fabric canvas panel, and where you've got the PVC, of course that PVC isn't going to expand and contract the same way that canvas does, so the canvas bit needs to work twice as hard for that weathering process to actually work, which is why the cloud gazer tents do take a bit longer to weather, especially on those seams, than these tents do. So in the instructions that you get when you first get your Glawning, we tell you to wet it first and make sure it gets really soaking wet, and then let it dry out on a nice sunny day like today. Now the problem is when you put it up in the garden, if you try and just wet it with a hose pipe or something, you'll find that this happens. You'll get the hose pipe on it and the water will just bead off. because it's got that waterproof coating on. So you see here that the water is just sitting on top of the canvas because of the waterproof coating. So that makes it very difficult to properly weather the canvas at the outset, because you really need to penetrate through that coating and get it so the canvas gets really soaking wet. But to do that, you're going to have to be standing there with a hose pipe for probably a few hours, maybe the whole day, maybe the next day too. So the best way to do it by far is to actually put it out into the open. If you've got a garden big enough to put it up, great, leave it up for a week, let the rain hit it, let the sun hit it, and that'll do the weathering process. Otherwise, you can kick-start it in your garden with a hose pipe, but just be aware that it might not do the job fully. And if you go out and get rain like we had this August, then it is likely that it's going to come through if the tent's not been fully weathered properly. So another question that we often get asked is, how often and when do you need to actually reproof the canvas? Now this is, again, this isn't an exact science. What you'll notice, this tent's been here for about 4 months, just sat here permanently, so it's had a good weathering, and you'll notice that although the water's still beading off there, it's not quite as good as it was on that brand new canvas. You can see in some of these places it's actually soaking into the canvas rather than just running straight off. That means that the weatherproofing on the canvas is starting to gradually wear away. When that stops beading altogether, or when that gets a bit worse, that's when you know you need to reproof it. And the best way to do it is to get some Fabsil, the biggest can you can get, put it in one of those garden weeders, you know, the ones that you pump, and you can then just pump it up and spray it on. You only need a very fine spray of Fabsil, 5-minute job to go all the way around, spray it on, let it dry, and that's your tent reproofed. If you've got any particular problem areas, for example on the seams, you can use seam sealer and just paint it on the seams, and that will give an extra waterproof protection on those seams. Especially good again on the cloud gazer. If you've got some water coming in through the seams on those, then seam sealer on the outside will do a great job of keeping that water out. Right, we're just going to take a quick break here to go and grab an ice cream. Back in 2 minutes. Oh, sorry. Right, so where was I? Yes, a lot of people wonder whether they need to Fabsil them when they first get them. The answer to that is no, because as we saw earlier, it's already got that lovely waterproof coating on. And actually, the more you add to that, the harder it's going to be to penetrate that coating to weather the Glawning in the first place. So actually all you'll do is slow the weathering process down. So when you first get it, you don't need to spray anything on it, you don't need to put seam sealer on or anything like that, you just need to let it weather. If you've been through a few cycles and you are finding that you're still getting some through the seams and you want to speed up the process or slow down the process actually, but it feels like you're speeding up the process because the leaks will stop, then you can put a bit of seam sealer on, but otherwise you don't need to bother. So we were talking before about the seams on a cloud gazer, and as you'll see on this one, you've got this PVC fabric stitched into the cotton fabric, and so the cotton fabric has to work twice as hard, because this, when weathered, this will just stay the same, it's not going to shrink or expand, so the cotton has to work twice as hard to weather there and to create that waterproof seal. So one of the first things you need to check if you've got water coming in is that it's not coming in through somewhere obvious. Make sure that on the top of your pole you've got one of these rain caps. That needs to go on the outside, not on the inside, and that just stops water getting in through that little hole on the top. On the inside, if you want to come in, make sure that these aren't sticking outside the tent like that. If they're on the outside, then all you're doing is creating a little funnel for the rain to come into your tent. So make sure that these are all tucked inwards like so. So thanks for listening. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments section below or email us directly. Any observations you might have. Otherwise, see you next time.